Let's edit this landscape in Luminar AI. Hey guys, Anthony Turnham here. This video is going to be a little bit of a journey both for you and for me because the photo that I'm editing here, I haven't done a dry run like common sense would suggest before hitting record on a YouTube video, but hopefully you'll get to see my thought process as I work through the tools inside of Luminar AI, making the decisions within my photo edit to realize that finished result. The first thing you'll probably notice is that the landscape is absolutely stunning, but as a photographer, I really let myself down. I think I got overwhelmed by how amazing this looks, and I just slapped the tripod down. I wanted to capture the stunning sunset that was going on because the sun was literally about to drop below the horizon line there, and I've done a big photographic no-no. The horizon line is running bang through the center of the frame, so I'm considering my final crop will actually be more of a panoramic so that I can sit that horizon line on one of the thirds, either the top or the bottom third, but we'll get to that. Before I start any edit, I like to know how much information I have to work with. If this was shot in JPEG, I would not be able to recover the highlights in the sky, and that would be a big problem. Also, as I start to boost the shadow detail that we have in the foreground, I wouldn't really be able to bring that back very well before the file just starts to break down and look pretty ugly. So I would strongly suggest when you're doing your photography, always shoot raw if you don't already. There are two ways that I like to quickly check just how much information I can bring back. One is by grabbing the Accent AI slider and just cranking it all the way to 100 and saying, oh yeah, I can bring back all of this detail in the cloud, around the highlights, all right around the sun, and even through the foreground here. So that's pretty cool. An alternative to doing that and a more traditional approach would be to jump into the light section here, grab the exposure slider, we can push it to the right and just see whether the shadow detail still holds up if we brighten it all the way up. And let's grab the exposure slider again and push that pretty far to the left, and we can see that we can bring back all of that lovely detail in the sky. So by using either one of those two techniques, you can see straight away exactly how much information you're working with in your file. And in this one, we can see that yes, we can bring back all of that lovely sky information and also brighten up the foreground and not lose any detail there as well. So this is good news. Let's press on. And the first thing I'm going to do is actually work with the Accent AI slider and just have a little bit of a toggle with this because it gives us such a quick way to get a leg up with any photo that normally it's doing a really great job for us. So I really like to leverage that tool. So let's open up the light panel and just see what we can do here. The first thing I like to do is, rather than apply the Luminar default profile, is just come down and put one of my camera matching profiles on. I'm going to go for a camera neutral profile, and if you don't see camera specific profiles, while it is possible that Luminar AI doesn't have access to those profiles, also consider, have you taken your photo in JPEG? Because if you have, the profile is already baked in and there's nothing you can do about it. So again, I strongly recommend shooting in RAW. So let's also play with the color temperature. This is something else that you can really exaggerate, pushing it into the warm tones, the cool tones, and you can do that and still keep detail in your photo when you're working on a raw photo. If you're doing this in JPEG, you're not really going to see that level of success, and the colors are going to go pretty funky pretty quick. I'm going to add a little bit of smart contrast here and then move on to the highlight slider, and I'm just going to protect my highlights, and then I'm thinking that we're going to also boost those shadows up just so that we're getting a little bit more detail in the foreground here. Currently I'm working on bringing back detail into the photo as a whole, so globally I'm looking at getting a good exposure. If I turn the eyeball tool off and then on, you'll see that straight away we've brought back a lot more detail in this photo than we had in the original file. And once I've set my black and my white point where I want them, I'm then going to be able to jump into my curves tool and just have a little play around with these. Now let's open up the curves tool. Now if you guys aren't sure how to use curves, I'll show you a few things in this video, but I've got a specific video that I've literally just produced and released, and I spent a lot of time working out how best to present the information, how you guys could understand curves in about 10 minutes, maybe it's 12 minutes. Anyway, I'll put the link in the description. Check that one out. But for now, we can create what's known as an S-curve by bringing the point down in the bottom left and bringing one up, which is going to bring the highlights up and just create more contrast within our image. Again, let's look at our before and our after. That's looking quite nice. Now I'll close the curves down and also close the light tab, and we'll do a quick before and after. And as we look at that, what I'm doing here is I'm working on my photo in a global sense. So up until this point, any change that I've made in the photo, I'm looking at it globally. I'm looking at it globally, the whole picture, and just generally get it looking good all the way through the whole frame. From now on, any of the tools that I apply or any changes I make, I'm always keeping in my mind, do I want to apply this effect to the whole picture, or do I want to utilize one of the masks that comes with that particular tool and apply the effect just in a specific area. So the next tool on the list is Structure AI, really powerful tool, but I've got a hunch that I'm probably going to be utilizing that in the foreground to accentuate the contrast between the highlights and the shadows in those foreground elements. So let's have a look at that. Open up the Structure AI tool. Let's grab that amount slider. Bada bing, bada bong. Look at that. Look what a difference. If I go from 0 to 100, man, love it. Okay, let's go crazy. Let's grab the boost. Oh, look. I rarely actually use the boost amount, but in this case, when I'm looking at these foreground elements, that's really helping those. I think like it's way too much for the sky if I toggle that off. But now this is where we utilize the brilliance of Luminar AI's masks. They're all built into the tool. I just need to click Add Mask, grab my paintbrush, make the opacity slightly lower, somewhere around maybe 14%. That's fine. More often than not, when I'm doing my tutorials, I'll be using a mouse just to do my masking. But I do that purely to show you guys that it's perfectly possible, if all you're using is a mouse or even a trackpad, heaven forbid, to do your editing, then you can do that. But what I would recommend, if you're serious about photo editing, get yourself a graphics tablet so that you can actually have the sensation of actually drawing on the screen. And another tool I'd recommend is the toolbox, because you can actually change the size of your brush with these dials, and you can configure these buttons to do little hotkeys. Bloody brilliant. Got a link in the description if you want to get that. But let's get into painting this mask. So looking at the screen, I've decided that I really like what's going on in terms of the local contrast between the highlights and the shadows in this foreground, but I don't really like what it's doing to the clouds. It's just making them a little bit too crunchy. So I'm going to click once, and because I'm only at 14%, I can basically build this effect up by just doing subsequent layers. For me, this peak here is the most important part of this photo, that and the sun coming through here. So I'm going to go a little bit heavier, and now I can come in and have a little toggle of the effect. Turn it off, turn it on, decide whether I like it at that 100% amount, and if I want to, I can then just come back and just ease it slightly back. Okay, let's open the color tab and have a look here. Personally, I feel like we've got a bit of a color clash going on at the moment. We've got some very deep greens going on in the bottom left-hand corner of the photo. We've got brighter greens, yellows, oranges, moving all the way through to blues and even purples up in the top of the cloud. So we've got a lot of different colors going on. And for me in my work, I like to unify our colors. So the greens and cyans, I'm going to try and push those more towards the yellows and oranges. And we're going to do that in the color section. So when we come over here, drop down the HSL, which stands for hue, saturation and luminance. And the hue is going to allow us to dial into any one of these colors and then actually manipulate it. So the greens, I'm going to push that to the left. And did you see that? In that bottom left, if you look there in the photo, those greens, as I move the slider to the left, they're going more towards that yellow zone. Let's do the same for the cyans, and we're going to take that bluey cyan look out and push that over as well. All right, and now the yellows. Let's have a little look there. Sometimes what you think is a green in your photo is actually represented in the program more in the yellow zone. So if we grab the yellow slider and now I push that more towards the oranges, you can actually see that that yellow actually harmonizes more into that orange tone. I'll be really heavy-handed here just so you can see, but we're almost going to that orangey red zone in what originally were greens. So I don't want to take things that far, but I am going to push it a little bit more towards that orange end of the spectrum so that our viewer is experiencing a little bit more in terms of color unity. If I turn this off and we've got those strong greens and we turn it on, we're now more in that yellowy orange zone. While I'm in this section, I'm going to jump into the luminance part as well, and this way we can actually brighten or darken certain areas. And if I darken that down, you'll see that a lot of those yellows all exist in this foreground element here. So rather than bringing them down, what I want to do is actually push them up. And again, that's helping to accentuate the contrast between these little pockets of light that are just kissing the very top of this amazing rugged landscape we've got here. We can do the same. Let's see if we can push those greens up or potentially take them down darker. And I think in this case, what I'm going to do is just darken that side down just so that our eye is led more towards these light areas here. Now I'm being quite thoughtful about what I'm doing here and I'm explaining my thought process. But if you're not really sure about the direction you want to take things, what you can do is just, I'd encourage you, grab the sliders and just give it a little wiggle and see what's changing and think, Do I like that? Do I want to put a little bit more in? Do I want to reduce that? Do I want to pull it back? You know, that's one of the great things with Luminar AI. It's all slider based. You're not going to break anything. So just dive in, have a play around. And that's one of the reasons why for my personal work, it's replaced the likes of Lightroom and Photoshop, because I just enjoy using it so much more. So certainly dive in and experiment. Okay, while we're on the subject of colors, I'm thinking the blues in this top left here are perhaps a little oversaturated, just in comparison with the rest of the image. So I'm going to come to the saturation section here, grab the blues, and if I take that all the way to the left, you'll see that that just knocks the blues out completely, and now we're dealing with grey, which obviously isn't what we want, but now we can just feather this back in, so we can just get that slider, go left and right, see where we're at, and go, yes, that is the look for me. Now, okay, let's move on. I'm not worried about the black and white section here, but details, what I might like to do is add some sharpening and potentially even add some of the small, medium and large details into the foreground specifically. So let me just boost these sliders up and have a quick toggle of our before and our after. And just like that, you can see that this area again is starting to pop. I'm not really liking what it's doing in the distance here. I feel like it's just a little bit too much back there, but certainly over this section here, which is the key area that I want our viewer to look at. So we'll utilize the mask on the details section and just paint this in and build it up over that area. This time I'm going to be a little more heavy-handed. Use my toolbox to increase the size, and I'm just going to paint there. That's one pass, and now I'll click and paint again and just add some of that sharpening in. Brush and maybe just paint this area one more time before and after. We've added some nice detail to that area, which is just one more visual aid to help guide our viewer's eye right to this area. Okay, no need to worry about denoise, the file's pretty clean, but we can jump into this landscape section, and again I'm going to grab this dehaze slider and push it to the max. I have no idea what this slider is going to do, so in the same way I said to you before, experiment with those sliders, that's exactly what I'm doing. Push it all the way to 100% and go, okay, do I like what it's doing? And more often than not at 100%, it's far too much and you're going to need to dial that back. But what I prefer to do is push it all the way to 100 and go, okay, I can see exactly what it's doing to my photo. Do I like that effect? And if so, where do I like it? And then I come into my mask, and that's when I will start painting that effect in just very lightly where I want it. So let's do that. I'll turn the mask on, grab the paintbrush and bring the opacity down, increase the size of the brush. Before, after, and now I've decided that I find it a little bit too much just on the horizon. It's darkening things down, and I just want the horizon just to brighten up and drift off to where the sun is here. So I'm going to remove that effect with the eraser, and I'm going to go to about 50%. This photo is already the epitome of what the golden hour should be about, but I'll put a little bit of that in there. When we tried dialing into these greens earlier, I feel like I didn't really nail the color changes. And this is one more thing that is pretty cool about Luminar, is there's not always just one tool to deal with a certain problem. You can use other tools as well. So we've got the foliage enhancer here. So what I'm going to do is actually crank the foliage enhancer, and that's going to intensify the greens in the photo, which isn't what I want. But if I drop down the advanced settings, here I can now actually change the hue of the foliage, and all I've done is push that towards the more yellows and oranges just to try and control that green a little bit better. And now I can go back to the foliage enhancer slider and just bring that to 0, see where we came from, look at what we just did, and then make that decision, how much of that do I want in. Let's jump into the vignette tool, and we're going to go really heavy-handed with this. I'm going to push this all the way to -100 because that's going to darken those corners and burn them down. I'm going to push the size to the left, and that's going to bring that effect in tighter. And then I'm going to drop down the advanced settings, and here is the most important slider in my opinion, which is that feather. And as we push that all the way to 100, it's the feathering that creates a soft transition from the center of the frame to the outside of the frame, and it's by increasing that feathering and smoothing out that transition, which is actually going to allow us to create a believable effect here. We can now choose our subject, and I'm going to click somewhere on this right side of the photo, and I've clicked between the sun and the top peak right here, and that's saying that this zone is going to be the brightest part of our image and everything else is going to taper off. And it's now that I'll jump back to the amount slider and actually start reducing that from where we were at 0, and just play with this until I feel happy with the effect. Okay, that's not too bad. Let's toggle this off, toggle it on. Yes, it's subtle, but it's another tool that we've got to help guide our viewer's eye to that very area of the photo that we say, this is the important part. Look here. Yeah, you can still see everything else in the photo, but kind of focus here. If we want to brighten the center of that vignette up, we can grab the inner light slider and just push that to the right. But I feel like things are getting a little bit too nuclear if I add that. Maybe we can put a little bit in. Yeah, let's put a little bit in. I love these creative tools and I get really excited thinking about what I might be able to do with them and the photo. But before I get to those, the next step in our workflow is to come to the local masks, and there I actually fine tune my image a little further before I start applying creative effects or color grading. So we're going to come up to the paintbrush tool, local masking. Let's add a basic local mask. And the first thing I'm going to do is create a mask that's going to darken down the sky. You can see in this poorly composed photo, we very much have what I said at the beginning, a no-no, a tale of two halves. Basically, we have the top half of the photo, the bright sky, and then we have the dark foreground. And I totally hold my hands up and say, I bodged up here with my composition. This is not a good composition whatsoever. But not only that, that sort of dichotomy of dark and light, I don't really enjoy that, so I'm going to try and fix that, and we'll do that by creating a darkening gradient on the sky. And if you guys don't know this technique, you have to know it. It's so important for landscape photography, architectural photography, just being able to do a darkening gradient to bring down that brightness value of the sky. So important. So let's do that. Grab the exposure and we'll knock that back quite heavily. I'll grab the highlight slider and I'll just reduce the contrast in that area as well. And I'm also going to reduce the structure in that area as well. And that's just going to kind of soften those clouds up and give them a little bit more of a kind of dreamy feel. And I'm saying in that area, as you can see, currently it's affecting the whole picture. And I spoke earlier about how I was treating the photo globally, and I was at that point. Now I want to talk into the image locally in specific areas. And that's where these local masks come in. So I'm going to create a gradient mask from the top of the photo coming down, fading away. So I'm going to get the maximum effect of what we've just created at the very top, and it's going to fade off as we work towards the horizon line. So we're going to come into gradient mask, and I'm literally going to click once and drag down, and I'll just go a little further than the horizon line, let go, and now we've done that, we can toggle our before and our after, and that gradient is helping to create what I call a light sandwich, a little term I came up with. Basically that's dark, light, dark, and that just helps again to hold our viewer's eye in the center of the image. Now I'm going to utilize the same approach to create another basic mask, and I'm going to see whether I can control the foreground and manipulate that in a way. I'm thinking I want to brighten up from where the sun is coming through to that peak just a little bit, maybe work on the contrast as well. So let's add another basic mask, and this time before I make any changes, I'm actually going to paint the mask in exactly where I want it. So the benefit of laying down your mask before you make any changes is when you make a change like that, you see it affect the area you want it to in real time. Incidentally, if you do want to follow along with this file, first of all, if you don't have Luminar AI already, I've got a link with a discount code, and also why you're watching this video if you don't have it already. But number two, for you kind folk who are supporting me with membership to the channel, I'm going to make this photo accessible for you. So if you're a member, you will know how to download this. Giving access to my photo files, that's one of the perks for you guys and my way of showing my appreciation for you helping support the channel. Right, let's carry on with our edit. Let's get into the creative section. There's so much good stuff that we could do here, but I'm going to keep this to a minimum here. I don't want to get too carried away. I'm going to jump in and I want to add some mystical filter to this. I want to give this more of a dreamlike quality. And if I push this all the way to 100 and we let everything go really nuclear and over the top here, you can see that we're saturating the colors and we're also creating a really nice ethereal glow. In my opinion, it's more akin to the original Autumn effect. I never want to put 100% of this amount on, you know, it's far too much. But by adding some smoothness, pushing that amount somewhere around 43, I don't normally even go that high, but I think this image can handle it. Let's toggle our before. Everything's looking quite hard and crunchy, but we turn that on and all of a sudden we've got a nice softening effect. I like what it's doing to the foreground more than the sky. I think it's just washing those clouds out just a little bit. So again, we can use a mask, reduce the opacity, let's say to 50%. And now I've effectively just left 50% of the effect in the sky and 100% in the foreground. Okay, let's come in and choose a LUT. Let's have a look at Anaheim. That's quite nice because it's enhancing the yellows in our image. Long Beach is giving a nice strong saturated look. I quite like that. But if we go for San Diego, yes, I like that. If I push that to 100, you can see exactly what colors are being introduced. If you're ever not sure exactly what a particular LUT is doing, I'd recommend push that amount slider again to 100 and go through them, and you will then see exactly what colors are being inputted into the highlights and the shadows, and you'll get to better understand what these color grades are actually doing. So I knew from experience before I even clicked on it exactly what San Diego was going to do, and I kind of had a hunch that it was going to look pretty good. So I like the pinks in the sky. That's just helping to add to that kind of nice evening sunset feel. So I'm going to go with that, but obviously 100's too much. Somewhere around 36 is quite nice, and we can always play with the contrast. And I think I'll push a little contrast in, play with that saturation slider and see what that's doing for us. And I think I'm going to reduce the saturation just a little bit, because sometimes just bringing the saturation down can just help to bring a more cohesive look to your overall color scheme. So that's what we've done here. So the final thing we need to do is just jump back into this composition tool. And in my mind, there's much more interest on this right hand side of the frame than there is on the left. This left hand side is almost redundant. So let's bring this in here and potentially do a much tighter crop here. This is probably how I should have framed it in my camera when I was actually there. One of the really great things about having megapixels to burn on a large sensor like the D850 is when you bodge things up like I did here, or you can get quite aggressive with your crop and still have a very usable file that I could still print quite big. Normally I'd frame things so much better than this in camera, please believe me, but we've got the crop tool and that's what it's for. I'm just going to do a slight rotation just to try and straighten up my horizon a little. We've got this nice little peak here falling on this bottom right third. We've got the sun pretty much close to that top right third, and overall I think we've got a much cleaner and better composition. And then if I notice anything around the edge of the frame, like I do here, just this little area of water that's reflecting the sky here, that really catches my eye. So I want to actually get rid of that. So I'm going to come back in. I can either crop this wider so that it's not existing right on the edge of the frame, or I can bring this in just a little tighter. We'll just recrop it like this. Now, the very last thing I'd recommend you do when you do an edit like this is, if you get carried away like I do, you're just compounding one effect on top of another on top of another, and before you know it, the photo's over-processed. And normally I would take a break, come back, see it with fresh eyes, and then actually reduce the effect if I needed to. But I'm not going to take my own advice and have an eye break so I can come back fresh. I'm just going to take it on the fact that I often work much more heavy-handed when I'm doing these tutorials and demonstrations for you guys, so you can actually see the changes more clearly. And I will normally have to come in and grab this bottom right hand slider, just bring that back. How about we settle at about 3/4 of the effect, and let's look at our before and our after. What a dramatic transformation. This is before, this is after. Right now I think that's a nicely improved edit, but I may come back to this tomorrow and think, oh no, this isn't right or that isn't right. And the great thing is you can always just jump back into those sliders and make fine adjustments. Do me a favor guys, let me know what you thought of this edit in the comments below. Let me know what you thought of the video. I enjoy sharing these techniques with you guys, but one of my most favorite things is to read your comments and see what you thought of the video, the edit, all of that good stuff. We'll leave this one here, and YouTube is currently recommending to you another video of mine that may be of interest to you. So why don't you click on that video and I will see you in that one. Cheers guys, catch you later.